To quote what I said on social media, God, I love this anime. Violet Evergarden is truly a treat. It is something I look forward to every single Wednesday. And I know many look forward to it on Thursday because sometimes you can't get around to watching it late Wednesday night. And I know there is a big divide in the community when it comes to the way this anime is being handled by KyoAni. I have discussed this already in a separate video, basically going on a little mini rant, talking about how many are saying the series is bad for adding in these anime original characters, when in reality, they have helped Violet as a character, and made it to where, me as an anime only, I can appreciate the slow growth that this series has. But also, KyoAni is known for slow series, and so, this episode, I already know it has a lot of flack. I've already seen it on social media, many complaining about it, saying this episode was boring, this episode was slow, this episode was just like, meh, I've seen it. And you know what? Everybody has a right for their opinion. Everybody has a right to dislike an episode or hate an episode or love an episode. Everybody has a right for that. However, personally to me, I have been enjoying this series. And normally, I'm not even gonna lie, normally when it comes to KyoAni, they have some phenomenal shows, yes. But at the same time, a lot of times, I don't typically continue reviewing their shows because they do start off very slow, and just the way they are, they're not meant usually for episode discussions, but for some reason, I cannot stop talking about Violet Evergarden. It's just a truly fun series to watch every single week with some content that fascinates me as an individual. So to get right into it, this episode, from what I have been hearing, I could be wrong, but this is what I've been hearing from the original source readers, is that this is the first real episode of Violet Evergarden that is not anime original. So this is like the start of the main source, from what I have heard. Now, I could be wrong there. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm just going by what I have been told. So if this is actually a thing now, like we're now getting into the main content, I actually think this is a good thing. I'm glad it took this long to get here, because it allows me to understand Violet's character and probably understand what changes she's going to have in the future of this story. For instance, this episode, there was many little nods to Violet's change that she has received throughout the journey already in all the episodes I have discussed. Like, okay, this episode starts off with a different perspective. We actually get to see Leon, this new male character that was introduced in this episode, and we see like a monologue from him, like an internal monologue and all that. He's discussing how he feels, or, letting us know how he feels about dolls and stuff, Ghost Riders. He doesn't really like them overall, but eventually his opinion of them change. That's kind of how the episode starts off. And so it's very different from the normal episode we have gotten. We get to see a different perspective of a character, but at the same time though, the way this episode was done, even though it had a difference in terms of showing us an inner monologue, it is kind of similar to what we've had in previous episodes. For instance, the other episodes, they were always these characters that had the spotlight, and Violet was alongside of them, and she was changing while being alongside of them, and how these people viewed her as a person. And that's kind of what this episode was. We get to see how every single episode, everybody's opinion of Violet changes. And Violet didn't seem as so, I guess, emotionless in this episode. I mean, you had it to where it did get mentioned, but it wasn't like a big thing of the episode. It's like she did show some emotion in this episode. So to get right into it, the main concept of this episode is that like 80 Ghost Riders are called in, and then manuscript guys are called in as well, 80 on each side, to be able to refurbish books. For instance, these books have, grown very old, ancient, they're crumbling and all that, and this astronomy HQ, they want to be able to preserve these books. So they called in Ghost Riders, obviously, to write down the books again, to preserve them. And while, the Ghost Riders are writing, you have the manuscript people, they're the ones reading it off for, the Ghost Rider can write it. So it's kind of similar to a letter and all that, but at the same time, it was more of preserving history, or preserving books and stories, which is a very different take on the series, to show that Ghost Riders, or, these dolls, they're not always writing letters for other people. They're not always, going around delivering letters, writing letters, whatever. They're usually also having to do stuff like this, preserving history, and it was a very different, take on the story of Violet Evergarden. But at the same time, though, we get to see how Violet changes an individual for the better at the end of the day. This character, Leon, obviously, his perspective on Ghost Riders, he doesn't really like them. He doesn't like how they're just mainly being in this, overall part of the industry just to eventually marry someone that's wealthy, marry into wealth. That, he doesn't really like that or respect that, and he's just not a big fan of it. And so as the episode carries on, you see how Leon slowly opens up to Violet. He slowly kind of gets a crush towards her, which in my opinion, I do feel like him gaining a crush or like some form of interest in Violet was a little bit too quick. Maybe it's because she showed some compassion towards him, or just, like protecting him, or, trying to help him out since, he was working with her. That's what he probably thought. But even then, I felt like that overall aspect of it was a little bit forced, but it was nothing too bad that ruined the episode for me, because that wasn't the whole point of what this episode was about. So, eventually we get to this part in the episode where it mentions a comet will be arriving. It'll be arriving in a couple of days, and it was very obvious from the get-go. When you saw that, you're like, yeah, it's going to pop up at the end of the episode. There's probably going to be some form of romantic moment with Violet and this dude towards the end of the episode. And I was under the impression when the episode, got to that point, I was like, is this guy a potential love interest for Violet in the future? Because, since this is the main content from what I have heard, I was under the impression that this dude can most likely be the main love interest for Violet, but it doesn't look like that's probably going to be the case at all after this episode. This episode was more episodic than anything else, which that is what Violet Evergarden has kind of been about so far, but there has been some progression with her character throughout the journey. So, yeah. Anyways, getting back into it though, we have a brief little scene in this episode where Violet actually protects Leon from basically people making fun of him, saying he's obnoxious, annoying, whatever, and saying, hey, Violet, you should come with us, chill with us, and all that. You're a better Ghost Rider. You're better than him. You should hang out with us. And they're basically being scum towards, Leon, trying to talk behind this man's back. And as we know, Violet is not someone to necessarily lie. She's not someone that really knows how to hide her feelings either. She's just blunt. She is just straight up blunt as a character. We have seen this many times throughout the series. And in that moment, when you see Violet kind of sticking up for Leon, it wasn't because she wanted to protect the man, because she cared about the man. It's because she was just being blunt. If they're judging this man for his origins, his mother, his father, his attitude, however he expresses himself, Violet's like, I'm just like that. So if you're wanting to not hang around someone, or I shouldn't hang around someone like that, then you shouldn't hang around me either, because I'm just like him. And I really appreciated that, because it kept Violet in character while she was able to defend Leon as a person in this episode. So it's not like she broke character, because if she was to go out of her way and show emotion and try to defend this man, I'd be like, whoa, what happened? Like, she doesn't show emotion. She's not like that. So they were able to keep her in character in that moment, which I do truly appreciate. So well done, KyoAni, and well done, the original source writer of this part of the series. Okay, so getting into the final portion of the episode, we have a segment to where Leon talks to Violet, and he's like, how do you feel about the Major? How do you feel about this person that you can't be around? And it's obvious, us as the viewer and all that, watching Violet Evergarden, we already know that Violet has feelings for the Major. It's very apparent. The Major obviously loves her. We knew this. He even stated he loved her. She wants to figure out what, I love you means, or love means, and that's been the whole point of the series. And it's obvious by the way Violet interacts with others, how she thinks of the Major. She does have, like, a crush or a love towards him. She just can't comprehend it. And when you have him mention, like, how do you feel? Like, do you have a achiness in your chest when he's away and you can't be around him? And she's like, yes. And he's like, that's loneliness. That's what you have right now. You're lonely. And she was finally learning what emotion she was feeling for so long now. She realizes that she is, in fact, lonely, and she misses the Major a lot. So that's showing that Violet is starting to make progressions in understanding herself and what she is actually feeling. Instead of just being someone that has to be told to do something, she is understanding now what it means to have certain emotions. For instance, loneliness. She's also very aware now that she does show a lack of emotion. She is very self-conscious about this now. You can see even in this episode when she starts moving her face and all that, trying to smile when she has a quick little interaction towards the beginning, it proves that she is self-conscious about it now. She knows that she needs to show emotion, but she just doesn't know how to. So, like I said, there is progression with her character. Now, in the last part, though, of the episode, basically, he's like, you do know that you love, and he was interrupted by Violet, which I'm not the biggest fan of that, the way that was done, basically how, that was interrupted. He was going to explain that she is, in fact, in love with him, but I guess that needs to be saved for later, because if this is the start of, Violet Evergarden, the actual real story, then it makes sense why they couldn't do that in this episode, because you need more time to, kind of pad this out and all that. But, basically, they got to see this comet coming in, and then she asked, am I worthy? Am I worthy to have this job and feel like this? Am I worthy? And I'm assuming the reason why she's saying this is probably because of the end of last week's episode when, the dude confronted her saying, you're trying to help people out, you're trying to save countries, but you're the ones whose hands are so bloodied and you've ended so many people's lives. And that scene didn't really get tackled in this episode, which I'll get into that in a moment. But, pretty much, Violet, she was questioning herself, like wondering if she deserved to be happy or deserved to have this job after what she supposedly has done. So she is showing feelings, she is showing guilt, she is showing loneliness, she is realizing what it means to actually show emotion now, which I appreciate that. So, good progression. I have no problem with this episode. So, yeah. That's pretty much it besides the stunning visuals from KyoAni, which that's to be expected when it comes to what they make, so that's not really anything to dive into. So let's get into the final part to talk about before I end this video. So, at the end of last week's episode, as we all know, Violet confronted, the brother and all that, and he's like, oh, why are you here? You're a ghostwriter now. It was a big scene at the end of last episode, and we got no continuation of that in this episode, which I was just like, why not? Why didn't we have any progression there? And I'm going to assume that either A, that was, well, even if it is anime original, KyoAni wouldn't just leave it hanging there and then not have it explained. So I'm going to assume that probably was real content, and it's probably going to be explained later on, because judging by the way Violet interacted in this episode, saying, is she worthy of her job, I'm going to assume she took to heart what the man said to her, and now she's applying it to herself. But even then, though, that was not dived into any further. It was not, continued on in this episode, not even at the end of the episode. So, yeah, we'll see where that goes. We'll see if that is explained in the upcoming episodes, but that's it for now. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you enjoy this week's episode? Did you hate this week's episode? Did you appreciate it? How do you feel about it so far? Be honest in the comments below, and I love you guys. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.